Dobrodošli. Imamo goste iz Engleske. Gospodin Alan Sircom je editor časopisa HIFI Plus. Ime sa velikom tradicijom u novinarstvu u Engleskoj. Čuo je puno sistema, bio je na puno izložbi. Zna jako puno u tom području. On će isto reći par riječi o sebi. Gospodin Branko Božić je jedan od najvećih distributera opreme u Engleskoj, koji to radi godinama. Isto ima je dodir sa vrhunskim hi-fi sistemima, proizvođačima i zna jako puno što se događa unutar industrije. On će isto reći par riječi o sebi da se predstavi. Okay, so I just briefly introduced you two, so now you can start talking about you, and in the end I'll say something about myself.
Okay. Thank you. This feels a bit like, I don't know, X Factor or something like that, so maybe we should have guilty. My name is, first of all, I have to apologize, I have a terrible throat. My name is Alan Sircom. I'm the editor of HiFi Plus magazine in England. I have edited audio magazines. Well, I've been involved in audio magazines for 26, 27 years. I've edited titles for this century, and I took on HiFi Plus in 2009. We are associated with the Absolute Sound in the United States, but we're an autonomous. We specialize in high-end audio and also headphones and streaming. We don't do a great deal of home theater, but it just gives you some idea of what we do.
That's it. Dobar dan, good afternoon. I'm Branko Božić. I left Zagreb in 1987, and while I was here, what do I do? Okay. I was involved in music. Music led to audio, which, believe you me, is the worst possible way of starting to do it, as nothing's ever good enough, and it stays like that. And when I went to UK, circumstances left me with no choice but to start my own business. And in somehow 30 plus years thereafter, I'm still there, as myself, and my humble establishment is still active. It transpires that Audiofreaks is today one of the two longest-standing, resilient, high-end audio distribution businesses in the United Kingdom, the other being the eternal leader, Absolute Sounds. Many new companies have come and gone, trends have changed, but I'm about to wrap up my working life at some point before it's too late, and it's a pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm very grateful to the organizer of this event to have considered me as one of the worthy participants of this workshop. Thank you.
Happy Branko, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, my name is Danko Šuvar. I live in New York for 26 years, and I write for hifimedia since the introduction, since 1996. And I regularly follow the high-end audio scene, so I go to the shows when I can. I'm invited to the presentations of the high-quality systems when they're presented by the leading hi-fi dealers and distributors. So I have contact regularly with the state of sound reproduction as it is now. I also have some personal contacts with some of the names in hi-fi audio, like Peter McGrath from Wilson, Luke Manley from VTL, Dan DeAgostino. So this is kind of my background, and I'm also technical editor of the magazine. Thank you. So now, first we will talk about the opinions about the trends in high-end audio and generally hi-fi technology. What's going on today? In the panel members' opinion, what's the most important thing going on right now? So we can start with Alan Sircom.
Oh, nice, easy one then. Well, I think two things have happened. Well, several things have happened recently. We've noticed that people have moved away from physical media in digital. They are now streaming increasingly. And this used to be one country, then another country, then another country. And it's now pretty much universal. Even, I think, Japan has started now to adopt streaming as opposed to physical media like CD and SACD. At the same time, people have always wanted something, still want something to hold on to. So that's why I think LP sales have gone up. Record vinyl has increased considerably. It's leveled out a bit in the States now, but sales of vinyl are still very strong, far more so than any of us would have predicted. When I started editing Hi-Fi Plus in 2009, we were still writing about final vinyl, and nobody talks about that anymore. We all listen to LP much more than we used to. I also think another thing that's changed in recent years has been the rise of headphone audio and personal audio, which 8, 9, 10 years ago was something that you just had to do because it all came with your smartphone. And now we're increasingly finding that the improvements in quality, both in terms of the format and the means whereby you can make that sound good with good headphones and good amplifiers, good portable DACs, has improved immeasurably. So there is a potential for good audio to happen between the ears, which never used to be a thing 12, 14 years ago. And that, I think, has been a real step in the right direction. Branko.
Thank you. When I started, my first products were analog, and that's all there was. So I think I managed to follow the curve of, I won't call it rise and fall and rise of analog, it's all relative, but that was all there was. CD just came out in 1983, and my observation is that apart from all the trends that Alan mentioned, is that we have technological and generational changes. Technologies are easy to define, but generational changes are far more complex, and they address the actual interest that we do or do not have in a certain way of playing the music back. People in their 20s and 30s today, unless they were fortunate to have elderly people, parents, whoever, around them, are not considering what we used to consider as their primary way of enjoying music, and that's fine. And that's the generational part. Technology-wise, I think we still have a lot to achieve. Nothing's ever good enough that it can't be better. And that, I think, is very, very important. So as long as, if it's headphones that people need to be interested in, I don't mind. If it's streaming, I don't mind. I'm absolutely not perturbed by any medium as such. It's the approach and unscrupulous set of criteria that we have to impose on ourselves. I always maintain that state-of-the-art is not the hardware. We have to be state-of-the-art and hypercritical towards ourselves, otherwise nothing will ever move forward. If we say something's good enough, that's the end of it. So it's delightful that after 30-plus years I can say good things are still happening, and they'll hopefully continue to happen, and I don't mind whichever medium or whichever technology, digital, analog, wireless, cables, doesn't matter, as long as it goes forward and you people who enjoy it push us and our makers and the press and everyone to keep making it better. And I'm delighted that the end is, as far as I'm concerned, nowhere to be seen. Thank you.
And now I have some questions. Let's start with, what is, in your opinion, the most important component of the hi-fi chain right now? Is it still the source, like it was claimed in the 80s? Considering now it's a lot of streaming and advanced digital to analog converters, using a lot of them using off-the-shelf chips and parts and components. So one can assume they tend to sound more similar than dissimilar compared to the analog years or the early years of CD reproduction? Or is it the amplifier now because it has more impact on the final sound if the source is more alike? Or is it the loudspeaker, especially considering the large number of loudspeaker companies popping up with the pricey loudspeakers coming out, like this is the new next best thing in sound quality. And also there's a big industry of cables, accessories, stands. So what's your opinion now? What's the most important? On what should the hi-fi listener focus most of his attention right now? Or is it still the room setup? You know, what would be the most important thing right now?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a big question. I think, in a way, the source still makes a big difference. I've heard very good streaming from very cheap sources, and I've heard a lot better streaming from better sources. But in a way, also the loudspeaker has improved and we can get more from it, and getting a loudspeaker installed correctly in a room can transform the sound of a system in a way that no changes in turntable can. So I think in some respects, actually the answer probably is just yes, it's all of it. But I think there are certain areas where you can start with by getting things good, and that I think starts with the loudspeakers. And it actually starts with the loudspeakers that you have, that there's a great potential in a lot of loudspeakers that you never hear because they're not set up properly, they're not fine-tuned, they're not worked well, and then from there you can work backwards. What you've got at the moment, in most cases, what most people's audio systems have, is 100 times better than what everyone else out there might listen to. It's just, it's untapped potential. And once you tap that potential, it can transform it. And then from there, maybe at that point you start to look at where you change things. But yes, I mean, the source is still very, very important. Don't underestimate the potential for improving on just a computer and a DAC in a computer audio service. The potential that can do can be transformed by improving upon those components radically. The same can apply to the amp, the same can apply to the loudspeakers. So the answer really is yeah. Anyway.
I won't say the same to begin with, but it's nice to see that we have a bright future with Hi-Fi Plus changing the philosophy of audio after 40 years of linen name. Thank God we now know the earth is not flat anymore. I look at it differently. Everything's a compromise and a balance. The secret of life is in balance, which is easier to preach than to achieve, of course. What would be the most important component? Simply the one that is the most colorful chameleon of all of them. And that is, as Alan said, the speaker. Not because it's as crucial as the source, perhaps, but simply because that's the only component that will change its nature and its personality with the slightest influence of anything. Absolutely anything. And if we go serious, it becomes big and heavy, and it's a damn nuisance to move it about. So find your speaker, screw it into the floor, and then go back to the source, is what I would do. And it took me a long time to get to that, But once you've determined your constant, your reference is not the best. Reference is a point from which you go above and below. That's your zero. And then play with the rest. Do whatever you think you should be doing. A turntable or a CD player can sound better on a better surface. An amplifier will be better if it's a better amplifier. Doesn't matter, but the biggest worry is out of the way. So I say it's the loudspeaker, and then, yes, it's the complete conglomerate of every single component, and I would rather not speak about cables.
Okay, I have another question. What's in your view the most improved hi-fi component in the last 20 years? I know it's a difficult question, but is it the loudspeaker with all the technological advances that we have? Is it the amplifier with better materials or better circuit philosophies that are coming? Or is it still the source? And also, you know, is analog still the king, or the digital is taking over the analog reproduction? I mean, high-resolution digital audio. So I know it's a hard question, but I'm really curious to see what you think about what's the most improved component in the last 20, 30 years.
Yes. In a way, again, unfortunately, I've got to say they all are. The level of engineering that we've put in mechanical engineering into making a turntable, and some of that comes from making a turntable expensive, but it also comes from having a raised set of standards. Now, unless you buy a really nasty, cheap turntable for about 50 euros, most turntables, most separate turntables, be it from the baby ones from Project and Riga on up, are actually pretty damn good. When you get to the point of the really good ones, they're outstanding. The level of engineering that's gone into these, and that's a production engineering skill, has improved immeasurably. And some of that's down to improved computer modeling of lathes, improved CNC. One of my first jobs was working in a precision engineering shop, and by today's standard, that wasn't precision engineering at all. The level of engineering that we have in terms of reading CNC, computer-controlled milling machines, means that we can build things to incredible tolerances. And that applies throughout, but especially in the turntable and in loudspeaker area. In loudspeakers, we have such improvements in material science, in engineering of, in using some really exotic materials. And again, some of that comes from the sort of the freedom of being able to price things at any way you want. You couldn't make a loudspeaker out of solid sides of aluminium 25 years ago because nobody would be willing to spend 80,000 euros on a loudspeaker. Now that people are, you can make them out of graphene, and you can make them out of carbon fiber, and you can make them out of aluminium. That then filters down into more affordable levels, hopefully, but it still means that allows people to set a high bar that you can then achieve throughout. And we've seen some wonderful loudspeakers that have appeared at reasonable levels, like the KEF LS50, that really couldn't have been done 5 years ago, 10 years ago. In terms of amplifiers, I think, and in electronics in general, we've had to trade against the demands of a computer industry and the demands of an energy industry, in that we have to make products that are energy efficient. Less so because audio flies low under the radar. People don't necessarily notice things. So you can make an amplifier that sounds great by making it very inefficient, that it has a quiescent current of hundreds of watts, which you couldn't do with a computer because you've got a limit of saying it's got to output a half a watt in standby. But those rules are starting to come through to all of us now. And that dictates how an amplifier is designed, and not necessarily for the better. So, for example, Class D engineering, which is making an amplifier into a tiny, very cold-running design, didn't make for a better sounding design. Now, in the course of 25 years of engineering, they've made them sound better, but they're still not as good as a properly engineered Class A amplifier, which runs hot and isn't allowed, will probably one day be banned by several countries saying it's inefficient. So the challenge that we face, I think, which is sort of an extension of this, is that what we need to do is we need to make amplifiers, bring amplifiers up to the level that we've got with source components and with loudspeakers. And I think that's the big challenge facing us.
Thank you. And before I try to answer the question, let me make 3 little observations. Does the tire need to be reinvented? Is every audio component, like any other creation, a reflection of its maker? And thirdly, and this is a very serious thing, even if it may sound funny, isn't the system sounding better or worse depending on the quality of wine we are drinking while listening? I don't think that we need to make anything drastically better. But I would say that when the CD happened, I felt that that was the first chapter of a detour in how audio components were designed to sound, for good or bad. Because somebody, or many somebodies, wanted to make something new sound better, or sounding as it used to sound on a different medium, and it took a couple of decades, and no one better than audio press to have witnessed it, for things to channel themselves and crystallize into what we have today. I don't know what got better and what was much better. I don't even know what better is, because, as you know, the law of diminishing return applies mercilessly as you go up the ladder. So the closer you are to the objective, as good as it gets, because I hate using the 4-letter word best, the more we have to do to get less more. It takes more to get a little bit more. So any improvement in any component, I personally value, respect, and appreciate as a huge step forward. So I think amplifiers, speakers, every single type of component didn't certainly get worse over the last 10 or 20 years. I'm sure Alan will confirm many of them did get better, but it's all down to who is making them and for what reason. Don't forget, nowadays we have $250,000, euro, whatever, loudspeakers or amplifiers. We didn't have them 20 or 30 years ago. There was no need. So the challenge is still there, and as a distributor with a fairly long-standing portfolio of makers, I'm always excited to see what comes next. And I'm glad to say, at least with mine and those others I know who make, it is getting better, and long may it continue.
Okay, next question. What do you think about the hi-fi designers today? Are they some kind of geniuses still, or the computer-aided design makes it much easier to create high-quality components? Do we still have new names in hi-fi industry, new designers, young designers? They're making their names like the old designers from the past used to be? Or it's all becoming more like industrial design, functionality, especially with amplifiers and streaming and converters? Where is the soul of the hi-fi designers in today's equipment? Is it still mostly in the loudspeakers, or it's still present in the other elements of the hi-fi chain?
There's there's a program for electronics engineers called SPICE, which is a remarkable piece of software, which essentially you define the parameters of what you're making. So you say, I'm making an amplifier, I need 5 inputs, I need this, I need that. Press a button, and it will draw the circuit for you. Now, to some people, that is their role as a designer. What you find in using SPICE is it gets you on the page. It allows you to make a circuit design, but it doesn't, and it gives you some input into sort of heat dissipation and various different areas, avenues of how you design an amplifier. But it's a starting place. So it allows everyone, any young, aspiring circuit designer, to make the same product. But what it doesn't allow is nuance. And the people who are good designers will take that circuit and build on it. The people who are mediocre designers will take that circuit and put it in a box. That's the difference between a designer and a good designer. And that still holds. That has held for decades. They just have a better set of materials to make a good product, to make an okay product. The same applies. There are similar programs, slightly more complicated, about loudspeaker design. Theoretically, you could use a program, enter in which drive units you've got, enter in roughly how large a loudspeaker cabinet you want, and out at the other end pops a perfectly designed loudspeaker. But it will never be a truly wonderful design. And that is the difference between today's designers and today's good designers. And we are starting to see a few guys coming along who've still got their own hair, or they've still got the hair color they were maybe born with, well, a few months afterwards. But it's rare. I mean, we're seeing people, I mean, there's a guy from KEF, for example, Jack Oakley Brown, who's he started working for KEF in his early 20s, and he's in his sort of early 30s now, and he's come up with some wonderful designs, and that's great. We're seeing the mantle being passed down from father to son in some cases. So Matt Weisfeld from VPI took over from his dad, Harry, and similarly Darryl Wilson has taken over from Dave Wilson at Wilson Audio, and they've each come with their own imprinter, their own stamp on the product. And in most cases, that's been a force for better, because the other guy has been doing it, the father has been doing it for 50 years, and it's got a little set in his ways. And it's great to see that change happening. Who are going to be the great designers? Don't know, and that's the great thing about it.
Thank you. I'm not the best person to answer that question, as for the last 30 years I was exposed and expected to tolerate designers. But I was at the same time very fortunate to have been working with individuals who always put precedence to art and only then to engineering and technology. And that is my way of thinking as well, is ultimately the little I know about electronics or audio, I'm self-taught. And alchemy is very dangerous, as we know. But designers are coming and going. Every next generation brings interesting people, and I'm absolutely certain that there are many, many more gifted and excellent designers out in the world who were never given the opportunity to apply their gifts into a physical product that you or I would use. They are all self-appointed geniuses by default, because if they weren't, they would never do anything, and that's good. I don't know who will be the great, who was the great. It's always easier to talk about the greats from the historical point of view, especially the dead ones. And they must have created a path for those who came after them, and somebody will come after them. And I'm sure there'll always be brilliant new products, brilliant amplifiers, speakers, everything. But they all need listeners in order to move, and they need critical listeners who will like the music and the audio enough to leave hypocrisy behind them and, rather than protect their own egos and vanities, tell those designers what's good and what's bad, and many good things will happen, I'm sure.
Thank you. My next question goes to the retail stage. The future of the small hi-fi store. Because now we have a competition with online buying and with generous return privileges, and we have a lot of music lovers of kind of limited means which would like to listen and compare products in a good setup environment. And now these small stores are being endangered by the lower margins. They have to organize the store, they have to have sound rooms, they have to present the equipment. And if the prices, retail prices of the systems they are presenting are lower, their profit margins are also lower, especially if people order online and simply try a couple of amplifiers online and then returns the ones they don't like. So then there's a force moving retail store to the higher priced equipment where the margins are larger. So the store has a dilemma. Do I sell one very expensive amplifier and make one sell and live from it for a while? Or I do try to push affordable equipment for music lovers who like affordable equipment, but I may go out of business in the process. So what's your take? What is going to be in this field, which is, I find it kind of critical for the future of this hobby? Any projections if you dare?
Well, I think the first thing to bear in mind is if you're trying to compete with Amazon, don't. Because there are huge online retailers like Amazon, and their product portfolio and their ability to serve a product to people is so easy and price discounted that if you as a retailer were trying to compete, you're going to go out of business. So you need to find a portfolio and I don't want to say a niche, but you need to find a sort of way of making your business unique that fits your market. Now, if you're in a very salubrious, very expensive part of town, you can afford to put expensive products in that store. If you're not, get real, you can't. You're not going to be able to sell Armani in a place where no one can afford Armani. You're not going to be able to afford to put Krell in a place where no one's going to buy Krell. And that holds universally. But what I think our business does badly is it doesn't make the retail experience something that people want to do. It should be, we're selling dreams and we're also selling often very expensive dreams. And you can't really do that if you have a store that's looks like it's 30 years old, looks like it's 30 years out of date. I've been to places where I know that I worked in a store in London and I know they haven't redecorated because I managed to tear a hole in a chair, and the chair is still there with the hole still cut in it. And that was 30 years ago. And so you got to think, guys, you're just circling, you're just waiting to die. And we have to change things. In the same way as a hotel here, this hotel looks very different, I would imagine, than it did 5 or 10 years ago, because they will have to keep recycling it. No? Oh, well, they try. Maybe a bad example, but it has been, most places are improved from time to time. And that has to happen. We have to shape our product to our market. And very, very few retailers are doing that at the moment.
Are we buying the product or are we buying the discount? So that answers the question to some extent. Affordability I always believed, and still do, that if something has essential sonic qualities, they'll be audible at a $100 level and a $100,000 level. And all I want is a hell of a lot more for 100,000 of the same. Good is good, bad is bad, price tag makes no difference. It's only a reflection of how much you can spend. So there is no reason why affordable music components and systems shouldn't sound decent. But often they don't. I don't like mentioning brands, but think of Rotel 30 years ago. It wasn't expensive, but it had, I believe, from memory, inherent musical qualities that the press, the consumers, the dealers, everybody said were the right ones. And so it was possible. The original musical fidelity, the preamp, for £300, whatever it was in 1981 too, was okay, and it sounded even better if you pulled out the bulbs that illuminated the front panel. Because Mr. Michelson was very cost conscious and he didn't make a big enough power supply. But it was possible. So I don't think, to answer the question, that the future of affordable audio is gone. It has to exist. As far as retailers are concerned, I think Alan mentioned it, that's a very dangerous area. You have to be viable, you have to be solvent to be able to exist. Whether the margin's 20%, 30%, or 40% is irrelevant. The audience, the turnover, the walk-in traffic is what matters. And I don't think we have that anymore. Not because of Amazon, and I agree, don't fight it, you lose. It's all changed. A good audio consultant, high-end or low-end, can't exist and make money and keep the business going these days as was possible 10, 20 or 30 years ago, for all the reasons that we mentioned since the beginning of this event. So if natural selection has to take place, then we have to hope that whatever's left will be worth being left. But I'm sure there'll always be projects in Rigas, there'll always be, I don't know, what's a cheap amplifier nowadays? Rotel still, I think it's expensive today. There'll always be small loudspeakers that will not try to sound like big loudspeakers, because don't do what you are not meant to be doing. Whether we will have means of presenting them through competent consultants to the end user or not is sadly a pure matter of computations. If the rent for the store, if the bills, if the staff can be paid, then the business will live. If not, Amazon is not going to start selling Rotel, that's for sure. So I don't know. If we go to the very expensive end of the scale, then things become, ironically so, even easier, because they are being sold these days, very expensive products, in all sorts of ways that one couldn't even imagine 10, 20 years ago. So on one hand, volume that needs retail, on the other, extremely exquisite, where the volume is so small that in theory, it's easier to do it if you have the money. So, time will tell.
I think it's time now for some questions and answers. Who wants to be... Excuse me? Who wants to be the first brave soul? Okay, I have to bring the microphone.
Hello, and thanks for being here for us. This will probably be a slightly different slant, which is one from a designer's point of view, so Branko probably will not throw me out immediately.
Later.
I have about 20 different questions, but I try to limit myself. So starting from the very beginning, what is the most important part in the chain? I would add one part which has not been considered, and this is actually the ear, because it also pertains exactly to the theme you have just mentioned now, which is how many people actually go into a hi-fi shop and why that traffic is dwindling, which is, do people actually know what they're listening to and how to listen and what they actually want to hear. This is, of course, goes all the way to music production. If the most music sold and consumed is being done by people who do it on fly in a tram, just like one passing right behind you, and it's custom made to sound okay in those circumstances, what do you get when you put it on a regular, proper hi-fi system? In my experience, I've had people who have tried that and said, oh my God, this is impossible to listen. There is so much things here, which make me extremely nervous. And I think this is a rather important thing, because even now, if you look at recordings which we often use as some sort of a reference for our tests, I mean, my God, you do not listen to a piano sitting in it. You don't listen to an orchestra basically with your ear next to the guitar strings. And of course, what happens is, oh my God, I can see so much more I can listen to so much more detail, which actually has never been there. So that would be one question and a comment.
Oh, me. I love chicken and egg questions.
Yes, it is one, yes.
You've touched here so many things that are the essence of hideout of subjectivism. Think of this, there is objective within subjective. If a composer wrote a piece and you or I played, how can we discuss the interpretation if not all the correct notes were played? Whatever. First things first, we get a sheet which tells us fundamentally how to do something.
And in some cases, even that sheet is not correct.
Well, hang on.
So
when you've done your homework and you can read, write, and walk, then you can create. But many of us like to jump stage 1 and go to stage 2. So yes, I mentioned wine, you mentioned ear. These two things go quite well together.
Yes, exactly.
Because the more the wine comes in, the better the ear seems to be.
Yes.
Even if not. So, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to dissect the music and count the microphones above the orchestra as no, I'm not going to say any percentage, I'll be crucified, as a certain number of audiophiles love doing because it's mentally considerably easier than being aesthetically capable? Or do you want to forget all that and you want to sit in row 5, row 10, or row 20, wherever you choose, turn the lights out in your room, and forget where the speakers were, and get engulfed in the holography and the emotional experience of what is actually far superior per se to anything we ever hear in a concert hall. Yeah. Concert hall has a magic of harmonic structure that no audio system will ever reproduce. But people are ungrateful, we are all ungrateful. What we get from good systems at home, information-wise, that's in the groove or on the disc, is so much more than you'll ever realistically hear at a concert. But we always say, was it a quad slogan, Yamaha, back to the natural? That's nonsense. What the concert hall gives, your listening room will never give, and vice versa. So what I think is important, that every one of us sets our own set of criteria that work for you, and whatever he says or I say or any of your friends, that's all very good to bear in mind. But if you know what you want to pursue, for as long as the objective part of it has been met, you'll never go wrong.
Yeah, that's, if I may comment a little bit on that, which is I would exactly.
We mystify, we complicate.
Yes, it would be nice to engrave this somewhere on a piece of stone.
It's complicated, but it's interesting.
Yeah, but as I said, again, from a constructor's point of view, you do have to, in a way, pander to your audience if you want to sell anything. So then there is one more problem which you have to figure out. And secondly, you have to somehow figure out how the wine works to get your system not exactly in that manner. It's difficult to explain, but in a way you have to sort of take everybody's impression with all the wine they drank and see, okay, what are you really hearing? I wouldn't be doing that. That's my point. I would rather have a philosophy, which is one more thing which ties in another question, but I'll jump over that. I'll just say two small little observations regarding what component has improved most. I would say amongst the classical things, probably the digital part of any chain. Since we started with CD and what we listen to today from almost the very same discs, if they were mastered properly, is very different. And then again, on the side of spice, which you mentioned, again from the side of a designer, if you do not know the logic behind the circuits and prior art, which is one thing which is interesting.
Not too technical, don't go there.
No, not technical. It's a very simple thing. It's almost exactly as if doing anything. If you don't know what questions you ask, you won't get a proper answer. And this is what spice is about. If you don't ask it the right question, it won't give you the answer.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I'm making a very, very simplistic sort of example of how spice works.
It's actually a brilliant example because it tells you almost exactly everything you need to know. There are many people who will make a simple amplifier and see the end result and then forget to look inside the circuit where it's like 100 amperes flowing and it will have gone in smoke in the first microsecond and they will say, okay, this works. You know?
I think the issue is that the nuance that you're showing is the difference between someone who is an audio engineer because they've done their electronics degree and they think they know about audio. They know audio is 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. It's done. And the difference between someone who has spent years and years nuancing it.
Well,
do you want to?
Yeah. Maybe some other questions, if you can, to give chance.
Can we hear a word or two about cables?
You have a question about cables? What exactly you want to know about cables?
Mr. Božić, he told us he doesn't want to talk about cables, but please, can you share a word or two about cables to the audience?
No, I won't. That's 3 words.
Thank you very much.
No, I will. You said a word or two. A cable is a cable. You have to have it unless it's wireless. And it's the most lucrative part of anything I've ever come across in audio business apart from snake oil. They are inevitable, and they are an absolutely wonderful medium for people to kill each other, to like each other, and to tell each other how the other one's deaf and knows nothing, and all the other positive accolades that we audiophiles share among ourselves, especially those who love internet forums, may I add. So that much about cables.
If you want to buy yourself a Christmas present, it's the best thing to do. Well, you can hang yourself as well. In essence, the great thing about, we see this a lot, especially in the Asian market, because people want to keep their hand in. They want to keep being an audiophile. And it's very difficult to do that when you've got to change your speakers every year, you've got to change your amp every year. We don't do that. We change these things over the course of 5 or 10, 20 years. It's very easy with the cables to just go, oh, yeah, okay, I swap that out. Now I'm still an audiophile, I'm still playing, I'm still a player. And I think a lot of people do that. They change cables because they need to change. There's no difference. They might not hear a difference between this or that, but they'll nuance a difference out of that. But these things drive people, some people, to keep buying a lot of equipment. I know a lot of companies who are kept very well lubricated through a constant stream of cable. That's not to say there aren't differences to be had, because sometimes you can listen to two very different very different cables, and they can make or break a system sound. But the difficulty is there's a lot of people who use this as just as a kind of pump to keep them going as an audiophile.
One other detail for me. Think of it this way. Why do your reference pieces of music change every time your system changes?
Let's not end this on cable. So is there any other questions?
Anybody?
Well, it might be my turn. It was about hi-fi audio retailers. Is it possible that the proper revenue of the retail might be just the distributors opening kind of outlets with most of their equipment actually there, as maybe the single retailer is not economically powerful enough? Kind of, if it's not possible to survive as only except for the small shops in the high-end parts of the city, be it London, be it anywhere else. Is it possibly just to speculate the future? That's just a very speculative question.
You mean standalone outlet or addition to the department store?
Next to IKEA.
In some respects, it's already happening. There's lots of companies who are sort of, we call them like micro distributors. They're a distributor that's also a dealer that's also a distributor. And there are also kind of, well, I suppose the obvious one is the Bang & Olufsen shops. They're chain shops where Bang & Olufsen retails, they only really retail Bang & Olufsen equipment. It works up to a point. The difficulty is ultimately it can limit the choice for the end user, because if you walk into a store that is a distributor, they're only going to have their products, and they're only going to want to sell their distributed product. They may have other products there as well, but the other products, they will get a much smaller margin. So if you're a distributor, you're going to cut out the middleman there. You shouldn't. You should actually have a distribution chain, but you're going to do it. So if you've got your product that you sell and distribute and someone else's product, you're going to push your product to the detriment to the other one, even if the other one is the thing that you should own. And that, I think, can be a problem. It sort of works-ish. We've had it quite a lot in the UK, where we've got guys who are like a kind of one-man band. They're a distributor and a retailer at one point, and that kind of works. But with that comes the knowledge that you've got to be a little more open-minded about the process from a buyer's perspective, so the buyer beware thing.
I've never been a big symphony orchestra as a distributor. And as time went on, I've become one of those that Mr. Sircom so kindly mentioned. In an ideal world, a retailer should be only a first port of call before, as it used to be done in the old days, the component in question would be brought to your home. Because what do you know? We can all manipulate you if you come into our yard and you tell them, no, not like that. It's much easier than cables come into place, for instance. A competent demonstrator can do anything you want to hear, more or less with any half-decent piece of equipment. If you tell me, I like this, I can make it go that way. I wouldn't, because I've never would do that, but it's doable. So you have to trust your retail consultant to start with, and that's not an easy thing to do for many reasons. So demonstration at your dealer, retailer, should be simply for you to make a first selection of what might be good at home. Sadly, those things don't happen anymore, or they happen very little. And that's the way it is. I, for instance, never ever in 30 years gave my best products to any retailer. Because the better the product, the easier it is to mess it up. It takes so much less to make a state-of-the-art product sound mediocre than a mediocre product sound bad. Something that can't go far, you can't destroy. So it all depends but ultimately, again, it's your ears, as our friend behind you said, and your experience with your music, for example, that all of that you take to whoever is hopefully going to be honest in presenting you a piece of hardware. And it's a calculated risk. I always say to my clients, trust me until I disappoint you for the first time, because then how can I ask you to trust me anymore? It's a dangerous area, and the way we all go forward, I wish there were dealers like in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s who would do all that you asked about.
Yeah, the follow-up to that would be how are customers and retailers to be educated to build trust again?
This will be without
and who?
We can only be as good as our customers.
Hi-Fi magazines.
Who is to educate them? Who is to build trust again? That's okay. It's a bit rhetoric.
It's a difficult question.
A general
question. There is no easy answer.
Please, I'm glad to see you here, and thank you. I'm a producer, passive components. Someone calling snake oil, but and I have one simple question, not about cables, but about sound quality when we are listening, especially when we are testing some systems or something of the system. Because right now we have a few different type of judging. I don't know how to say. In the last maybe year and a half, most people likes higher frequencies, which is domain of Twitter, and maybe some little bit about mid-range, likes a very, very open stage. Personally, I do not think that it is correct, because it does not exist in I don't know, in usually performance. What do you think about it? Is it correct or not? Because I'm talking about extremely wide open stage in over, I don't know, 7 kilohertz or something like this. So
I mean to ask, is it realistic or not?
No, it is not realistic. I know that.
Today?
I know that it is not realistic, but especially because I am in maybe the high end and the highest. And
in a way, I think this comes back to what we were saying about music. Over the course of the last 20, 30, maybe 40 years, we've noticed a distinct move away from people who walk into a store with a set of recordings that are actually pretty good, that they'll be into quite acoustically recorded, acoustic instruments, so classical music, jazz, and they'll often be walking in with a selection of music that's actually just, most of it's electronica. And I think some of the change that we've had into moving into electronica and moving into rock gives that sense of quite forward and bright sound.
I'm talking about natural instruments, voices,
I agree.
Violins,
yes,
or something
but
like that.
there's a backwash from that. Your perception of what you believe audio can do is in some respects shaped by the kind of music that you grew up listening to or you started your journey on. And if you're listening to an awful lot of rock and roll, an awful lot of electronica, and then you sort of come to that and start to look at more sort of that more acoustic music afterwards, you've already had those years of pre-programming of saying it's got to be bright, it's got to be forward, it's got to be, and that starts to change with, that creates a change in the listener. And in some respects, this is something that we saw in the 80s particularly, that people were very much governed by this kind of light, bright, fast sound, because all they were listening to was listening to sort of Pink Floyd and things like that, and they wanted this kind of very quick sound. Pink Floyd's actually...
It is the matter of production, I mean.
Yeah.
Because it's good.
But the producer also have to know what he or she wants.
Yeah, I know that.
Don't forget, every end product, and I'm talking about a recording now, is a consequence of another human being,
of course,
or a group of human beings, even worse, with some ideas. And the trouble is that I call it all aesthetic categories. It's intangible. How am I to tell you that your focus on 7 kilohertz is wrong, that you should focus on 6 kilohertz?
Yeah, I understand.
On what basis?
Yeah.
I don't think you should focus on any single frequency or any nonsense of the kind anyway, whether you are a producer or not. Because if you sit in that room and deal with the sliders or whatever they are, I don't want to know what you do. I only want to have the product you give me to hear.
Okay.
Because you know what you want from it. So this is another creative part of the process. But too many people are far too obsessed with the techno aspect of audio. Let those designers who think they know everything think about that. You and I are just here to listen. And if it sounds okay, if it's natural or...
Yes, but I'm asking you, what is okay? What is right?
I will not give you the answer to that question, even if I could.
Why?
Because who am I to tell you that?
You are the person, you have authority.
Well, I'm not, you see, no. You know as much as I do. I have my history of learning. You have yours.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
And I value yours. Okay. So I can't impose that on you.
May I tell you one more thing about, because I do not have... I don't mean to talk about cables as something very special or something like this, no. But, for example, I can manipulate with sound, with cables. And if you are interested to listen, we can hear it, if you are interested, of course, okay. And what is going on? Because I can make some, for example, deeper bass is more defined, or open stage, or a more articulated mid-range, things like that. And at some moments, because I have clients around the world, I do not know how to sell something which is not right. I do not know only for money. It is very important, because I love it, and I do not want to do. And I'm asking what is right.
Can I say something about it? Maybe it's going to clear it up. We basically have two schools of sound today. We have being transported to the recording venue, which is like BBC monitor speakers and good sounding neutral speakers. And we have having the performance in room playing in front of you with less of the soundstage information, meaning more direct and straight approach to sound, like horn loudspeakers. So now so from there, all the differences in taste may come from different expectations of people. Some people want to hear soundstage and the acoustics of the space, and some people want dynamic impact of the recording, like it's being pushed onto you straight from the speakers. So what's your opinion? What's closer to what's the more ideal approach? Or is there any speaker that can combine both aspects into the one speaker? Or it's too dependent on the recording to even talk about it?
Human beings are highly trained animals, don't ever forget that. We are conditioned from the moment we were born. Anything can be learned, anything can be made a part of us. I'm sorry, it's not, for me it's more psychological than scientific. So if you make something that you want to give to other people to use, never ever ask a question, because then how can you do it? What you believe is right for you and a product that carries your name. End of story. Amen. Whether it's right or not, there'll always be a number of people ask him. There are always people who will a priori say something's wrong when someone's done it. There are people who always only criticize. But if you know that what you've done is how you see it, don't ever look back and do it. What more can you do?
I can't really add any more to that. I can't really answer any more to that because I'm running out of voice. So I think we'll probably have to wind this up from here. But,
Okay, I'm receiving the subtle signals from the organizer that it's time to wrap this up.
He's fed up.